Have you noticed that recently someone in your life started changing in a way you could not explain at first? The conversations began to feel heavier. The energy between you and them no longer felt peaceful. And deep inside your spirit there was a quiet signal telling you something was shifting, even though your mind kept trying to ignore it, because sometimes the hardest truth to accept is not that someone hurt you, but that God is removing someone from your life on purpose right now. And the reason this moment feels confusing, emotional, and even painful is because separation guided by God never begins with clarity, it begins with discomfort. And what you are experiencing today is not rejection, it is protection, it is not loss, it is preparation, and it is not punishment. It is alignment with the future God has already planned ahead of you long before you realize something needed to change, because there are relationships that begin as blessings but slowly become distractions. There are people who enter your life as support but quietly become sources of stress, doubt, delay, or insecurity. And when God sees something affecting your peace, your growth, your purpose, or your destiny, He does not always explain immediately what He is doing, because sometimes explanation would make you resist the very rescue He is performing for you behind the scenes. And right now, if someone is becoming distant, if communication is breaking down, if misunderstandings are increasing without reason, or if their presence suddenly feels heavier than before, it is not happening randomly, and it is not happening because you failed as a person. It is happening because God is separating you from something that cannot go where you are about to go next. And the reason this separation feels emotional is because your heart remembers the connection, while your spirit already senses the transition. And there are moments when God removes someone not because they are completely bad, but because they are no longer right for the next season He is leading you into. And one of the hardest lessons to accept is understanding that not everyone assigned to your past is permitted to travel into your future, because some people were only meant to walk with you through a chapter, not the entire story. And when God begins this process, He rarely announces it loudly. Instead, He allows small signs to appear quietly. Conversations that once flowed easily begin to feel forced. Trust that once felt natural begins to feel uncertain. Peace that once surrounded the relationship slowly disappears, and you begin wondering why something feels different even though nothing obvious has happened yet. And what you must understand today is that God often removes toxic influence gradually, so your heart has time to adjust to what your spirit already knows is necessary. Because if He removed certain people instantly without warning, the emotional shock would feel overwhelming. But when He removes them step by step, it becomes easier for you to recognize that what is happening is not abandonment, it is divine repositioning. And there is someone listening to this message right now who has been blaming themselves for a relationship that suddenly feels strained, when in reality God is protecting your future from someone who cannot honor the calling placed over your life. And the reason this message is reaching you today is because your spirit already sensed this shift before your mind accepted the truth. And sometimes when God removes someone from your life, it is because they secretly carry jealousy toward your growth. Sometimes it is because their mindset could not support your next level. Sometimes it is because their presence created confusion instead of clarity. And sometimes it is simply because your destiny requires a different environment than the one you have been standing in until now. And even though your emotions may feel uncertain at this moment, what God is doing is not random, and it is not accidental. Because God never subtracts something valuable from your life without preparing something greater to replace what was removed, and one of the strongest signs that God is removing someone toxic from your life right now is when your peace begins returning the moment distance appears, because peace is always the confirmation signal God uses when He is guiding you toward alignment. And there are people who stay connected to relationships long after God has already released them spiritually, simply because memories feel stronger than truth. But today God is reminding you that your future cannot be built inside an environment that constantly weakens your confidence, and your calling cannot grow in a space where your spirit feels smaller instead of stronger. And the reason this separation is happening right now instead of later is because something new is preparing to enter your life, and God is clearing emotional space before He introduces what belongs in your next chapter, because elevation always requires separation before transformation, and transformation always begins with letting go of what no longer matches who you are becoming. And even if this process feels uncomfortable at first, you must remember that God does not remove people to hurt you, He removes them to heal you from influences that quietly slowed your progress without you realizing it. And the truth is, sometimes the very relationship you were trying hardest to protect was the same relationship God was trying hardest to release from your life, because He could see what you could not see yet, and He could hear conversations about you that you never heard, and He could recognize intentions that were hidden from your understanding. And right now, as you listen to these words, something inside your spirit is beginning to recognize that what felt confusing before is starting to make sense, because God is not taking something away from you, He is guiding you towards something that matches your purpose more clearly than what you are leaving behind. And the reason the timing feels unexpected is because God often moves suddenly when your next level is closer than you think. And what you must not do during this season is chase what God is removing, because chasing what God is releasing only delays the blessing He is preparing ahead of you. And there is a powerful shift happening around you right now, whether you fully see it yet or not, because the moment God begins removing someone toxic from your life, it means your environment is being upgraded for the assignment waiting in front of you. And even though this moment may feel uncertain today, you will soon recognize that what felt like loss was actually protection working in your favor all along. And what makes this season even more confusing for you is that the separation did not happen the way you expected it to happen, because you thought if someone was meant to leave your life there would be a clear argument, a clear reason, a clear ending. But instead, what you are experiencing feels slow and strange and emotional and quiet at the same time, as if something invisible is gently pulling you away from a connection that once felt permanent. And the reason it feels this way is because when God removes someone toxic from your life, He does not always create loud chaos. He often creates silent distance, because silence reveals truth faster than conflict ever could. And right now, what you are feeling inside your spirit is not rejection, it is protection, because there are conversations that stopped not because you failed, but because they were no longer aligned with where God is taking you. And there are people who suddenly became unavailable, not because you were not important, but because their assignment in your life has already finished, even if your heart has not caught up with that reality yet. And this is why you must pay attention to what is changing around you instead of chasing what is disappearing from you, because when God begins preparing your next season, He first clears the space that your future needs to breathe inside your life. And sometimes that clearing process feels lonely before it feels powerful, and sometimes it feels confusing before it feels purposeful, and sometimes it feels painful before it becomes peaceful. But what you must understand right now is that heaven never removes something valuable from your life without planning to replace it with something greater, even if you cannot see that replacement yet, even if you cannot understand the timing yet, even if you are still asking God why this had to happen the way it happened, because there are people who are comfortable with the old version of you, but they were not prepared for the stronger version of you that God is creating right now. And when your spirit begins growing faster than the environment around you, separation becomes necessary, not optional. And this is why you started noticing changes in conversations, changes in energy, changes in attitudes, changes in support, because some people were assigned to walk with you through your survival season, but they were never meant to walk with you into your purpose season. And what you are stepping into next requires clarity, requires strength, requires faith, requires courage, and most importantly, it requires the right people standing beside you, not the familiar people standing around you. And that is why what feels like loss today is actually alignment happening quietly behind the scenes, because God is not punishing you, He is positioning you. He is not closing doors to hurt you, He is closing doors to protect the version of you that is about to rise higher than you have ever been before. And there are moments when your heart will still want to hold on to memories, because memories feel safe and memories feel comfortable and memories feel familiar, but your destiny cannot grow inside yesterday's relationships, and your future cannot expand inside yesterday's environment. And this is why you must trust what God is doing even when you cannot explain what God is doing, because there are prayers you prayed months ago that are being answered right now through these unexpected changes. And the truth is, some people could not stay in your life and still allow your prayers to come true, and that is something most people do not realize until later, but God already knew it before the separation even started, which means what is happening around you is not random, and it is not accidental, and it is not meaningless. It is intentional divine movement happening step by step to guide you into a life that matches the purpose placed inside you long before you even understood it. And the reason this message is reaching you at this exact moment is because your spirit needed confirmation that what you are feeling is real, and what you are experiencing is not a mistake, and what you are walking through right now is not the end of something important. It is the beginning of something powerful that your life has been quietly moving toward for a long time, even when you did not notice it, even when you doubted it, even when you almost gave up on believing that things could change for you, because sometimes the biggest sign that God is preparing to elevate your life is the sudden removal of people who were comfortable with you staying the same and uncomfortable with you becoming who you were truly meant to be. Sparkles. And when that shift begins, it may feel like confusion at first, but very soon it will start to feel like freedom. And when it starts to feel like freedom, you will finally understand that what left your life was not taken from you, it was released from you, so your destiny could finally reach you at the right time, in the right way, with the right strength inside your spirit. There is a moment that almost no one talks about when God begins removing someone toxic from your life, and that moment feels confusing because instead of immediate peace you first feel silence, instead of clarity you feel distance, instead of celebration you feel a strange emptiness. And the reason this happens is because your heart was connected longer than your spirit was supposed to stay attached, and God is not just separating people from your life, He is separating emotional habits, patterns of dependence, expectations you quietly built, and versions of yourself that were created just to survive that relationship. And if you are honest, there were times when you ignored your intuition just to keep the connection alive. There were moments when you stayed quiet when you should have spoken. There were situations where you accepted less respect than you deserved just because you did not want another goodbye in your life. But God saw every compromise you made in silence, and He also saw the future that compromise would have created if He allowed it to continue. And sometimes protection does not feel like blessing at first. Sometimes protection feels like loss. Sometimes protection feels like confusion. Sometimes protection feels like loneliness. But later you realize it was actually rescue happening quietly behind the scenes, because not everyone who walks with you is assigned to reach your destination, and not everyone who supports you at the beginning is meant to stand beside you when your purpose starts becoming visible. And this is why the separation you are experiencing right now feels different from normal distance, because deep inside you can feel something shifting, you can feel something closing, you can feel something ending, even if there was no argument, even if there was no dramatic goodbye, even if nothing obvious happened, because spiritual separation rarely needs explanation when God is involved. And what makes this moment powerful is that the person being removed from your life may not even realize why things are changing, while you are slowly starting to understand that heaven is making room for something healthier, stronger, and more aligned with your future. And sometimes the reason the connection becomes uncomfortable is because your growth has reached a level that the relationship was never designed to support. And instead of forcing you to shrink again, God begins creating distance so you can expand into who you were always meant to become. And yes, it hurts sometimes, because familiarity always feels safer than uncertainty, but what feels familiar is not always what is meant to stay. And what feels uncomfortable is not always something you should resist, because many times discomfort is simply the sound of transformation happening inside your life. And the truth is, there are people who are only meant to walk with you during your confusion, but not during your clarity. There are people who understood you when you were doubting yourself, but cannot recognize you when you start believing in yourself. And there are people who supported the version of you that needed approval, but struggle with the version of you that now carries confidence, purpose, and direction. And God is not punishing you by removing them. He is protecting your future from relationships that cannot grow where you are going. And even though part of your heart still wonders if things could have been different, the deeper truth is that if the connection was meant to stay, it would have strengthened as you grew instead of weakening as you changed. And that is one of the clearest signs that this separation is not random, because when God removes someone, He does not just close a door, He also opens your awareness. He starts revealing things you ignored before, He starts showing patterns you overlooked before, He starts reminding you of moments when your spirit felt heavy, even when everything looked normal on the outside. And suddenly you begin remembering conversations that drained your energy, situations where your confidence disappeared, environments where your peace quietly faded, and you realize that what you thought was comfort was actually limitation, and what you thought was loyalty was actually attachment, and what you thought was stability was actually resistance to change. And once God opens your eyes like that, it becomes impossible to return to the same emotional position you once had, because clarity changes everything. Clarity breaks illusions, clarity exposes hidden pressure. Clarity restores your strength. And this is exactly why the separation feels permanent, even if nobody officially said goodbye, because your spirit has already stepped into a new season before your emotions fully caught up with it. And right now, even if you cannot explain everything that is happening, you can still feel that something inside you is becoming stronger, calmer, and more certain than before, because when God removes someone toxic, He does not leave you empty. He replaces confusion with wisdom, He replaces pressure with peace, He replaces fear with direction, and He replaces emotional exhaustion with quiet confidence that you are finally walking toward the life that was always waiting for you even when you could not see it yet. And if you stay patient during this transition, you will soon recognize that what felt like loss was actually preparation, what felt like distance was actually alignment, and what felt like silence was actually God protecting your heart from a connection that could never support the future He is now preparing for you. Before what God is about to do next in your life becomes visible to everyone around you, there is always a hidden season where things feel strangely quiet yet deeply uncomfortable at the same time, because this is the moment when heaven begins rearranging what your eyes cannot yet see, and what feels like delay is actually divine protection, what feels like distance is actually divine positioning, and what feels like loss is actually the clearing of space for something that could never arrive. While certain people were still standing too close to your destiny, and the reason this stage feels confusing is because you are not just being separated from people, you are being separated from versions of yourself that tolerated less than what God prepared for you. And sometimes the hardest truth to accept is that not everyone who started the journey with you was meant to walk into the next chapter with you, because some people were assigned to your process but not to your promise, and when their assignment ends, their presence begins to feel heavy, their words begin to feel discouraging, and their energy begins to feel different, not because they suddenly changed, but because your spirit started recognizing that your future cannot grow while your past keeps holding your attention. And this is why lately you may have noticed conversations becoming shorter, connections becoming weaker, invitations becoming fewer, and explanations becoming unnecessary, because God does not always announce separation. He simply allows clarity to grow inside you until you understand what your heart has been trying to tell you for a long time. And the reason this clarity arrives now instead of earlier is because your strength finally reached a level where you can release what once felt impossible to let go of. And there are moments when you will question whether you are doing the right thing, because loyalty has always been part of who you are. But what you must understand is that loyalty to people should never come before obedience to God, because sometimes the most loving thing you can do for your future is step away from what your past kept trying to normalize. And even though it may feel uncomfortable right now, this discomfort is evidence that something sacred is being protected inside your life, something that cannot survive around negativity, something that cannot grow around doubt, something that cannot expand around people who secretly benefit from your insecurity. And what makes this moment powerful is that heaven is not just removing distractions, God is aligning your environment with your calling, because the blessing that is approaching your life requires a different atmosphere, a different mindset, a different circle, and a different level of confidence than what you had before. And that is why certain doors are quietly closing without arguments, without drama, and without explanations, because when God closes a door, He does not need your permission, He only needs your trust. And sometimes trust looks like walking forward even when you cannot clearly explain why something suddenly feels different. And the reason this step matters so much right now is because the next opportunity that is coming toward you will require courage, not comfort, faith, not familiarity, and obedience, not approval from everyone around you. And there are people who will not understand your silence, your distance, or your decisions, but their Confusion is not your responsibility because when God begins preparing someone for elevation, He also begins protecting them from unnecessary opinions, unnecessary attachments, and unnecessary influences that could weaken their focus before the breakthrough arrives. And what you are experiencing right now is not isolation, it is preparation, because the same God who removed certain people from your life is the same God who is already preparing the right connections to enter at the perfect time, connections that will support your growth instead of questioning it, connections that will celebrate your progress instead of competing with it, and connections that will speak life into your purpose instead of reminding you of your limitations. And even though you cannot see them yet, they are already moving closer, step by step, moment by moment, situation by situation, because divine alignment never happens randomly, it happens intentionally and precisely. And the reason everything feels so different right now is because your life is shifting from survival mode into purpose mode, from confusion into clarity, from waiting into movement. And what makes this transition so powerful is that it is happening quietly, without announcements, without approval, and without the need for anyone else to understand it, because God often does His most important work in silence before He reveals it in public. And if you stay patient during this season, if you stay faithful during this transition, and if you stay strong during this separation, you will soon recognize that what once looked like loss was actually protection, what once looked like rejection was actually redirection, and what once looked like delay was actually perfect timing, preparing you for something greater than what you originally asked for. And the truth is, the reason this message found you at this exact moment is because your spirit needed confirmation that you are not walking through this change alone. And even now, while you are still adjusting to what feels unfamiliar, God is already positioning something ahead of you that will make sense of everything you had to release, everything you had to outgrow, and everything you had to leave behind. So do not be discouraged by what is ending around you, because sometimes what ends quietly is making room for what is about to begin powerfully. And the next chapter of your life is not arriving by accident, it is arriving by design. And nothing that is happening right now is random, it is preparation, it is alignment, it is protection, and it is proof that something bigger than you expected is already on its way toward your life. Folded hands sparkles, and when it finally arrives, you will understand why certain people had to step back, why certain plans had to change, and why certain doors had to close, because everything that is happening right now is guiding you toward a future that matches the promise God placed inside your heart long before anyone else could see it fire. Have you started noticing that the silence around you is getting louder than the noise you used to live in, and that the people who once filled your days with constant conversation are suddenly distant or unavailable, because what feels like loneliness right now is actually a powerful sign that God is creating sacred space around your destiny? And the reason this moment feels uncomfortable is because your spirit is being prepared for a level of clarity that cannot exist while certain voices are still influencing your decisions and emotions. And many people misunderstand this stage, because they think when someone walks away or becomes cold, it means something has been lost, but in the spiritual realm it often means something dangerous has been removed before it could block what God is about to release into your life. And the truth is, God never removes someone without a reason, and He never allows separation without purpose. And what you are experiencing right now is not rejection but protection, because there are connections that feel strong emotionally but are weak spiritually, and there are relationships that feel familiar but are quietly draining your confidence, your peace, your focus, and your ability to recognize the opportunities that God has been placing in front of you. And sometimes the hardest truth to accept is that the person you were trying to keep was the very person slowing down the timing of your breakthrough. And God saw what you could not see and heard what you could not hear and understood what your heart was too attached to recognize, and that is why the distance began forming, even when you tried to fix things, even when you tried to communicate, even when you tried to stay patient, because this was not something you could repair on your own, since God Himself was stepping between you and something that could not go with you where you are being called next. And there is a reason your spirit started feeling heavy around certain conversations, and a reason your motivation began disappearing after certain interactions, and a reason you started questioning yourself more than usual, because when someone is not meant to remain in your future, their presence begins to confuse your identity instead of strengthening it. And God will never allow confusion to stay in your life when clarity is part of your assignment. And what you are experiencing right now is the beginning of emotional realignment, where your heart is slowly learning to release what your destiny cannot carry forward, and it feels painful because attachment always feels like love until God reveals the difference between comfort and calling, and many people stay connected to what feels comfortable even when it quietly blocks what they were created to become. But you are not being allowed to stay in that place anymore, because your purpose is too important, and your future is too valuable, and your spiritual growth is too close for you to remain surrounded by people who cannot recognize the version of you that is being prepared right now. And what makes this season even more powerful is that while you thought something was ending, God was actually removing distractions that were hiding the next opportunity from your sight, and there are blessings already moving toward you that require a different mindset, a different environment, and a different level of emotional freedom than what you had before. And that is why certain connections had to loosen their hold on your life, because they were connected to your past identity, not your future assignment. And sometimes the strongest evidence that God is working behind the scenes is the sudden shift in who remains close to you and who slowly disappears without explanation. And even though it feels confusing at first, there will come a moment very soon when everything starts making sense, and you will realize that what you thought was loss was actually preparation, and what you thought was distance was actually direction, and what you thought was silence was actually protection, guiding you away from something that could not grow with you and closer to something that has already been chosen for your next chapter. And the reason your heart is being stretched right now is because you are stepping into a season where emotional strength will become one of your greatest advantages, and God is teaching you how to stand confidently even when familiar support systems are no longer around, because where you are going next requires faith that does not depend on constant reassurance from others, and courage that does not wait for approval before moving forward. And there is something powerful about the moment when you stop chasing what is leaving and start trusting what God is arranging, because that is the moment your energy returns, your clarity increases, and your confidence begins rising again, and you start seeing opportunities that were always there but hidden behind emotional attachment. And this is why you must not interpret this separation as a set back because it is actually a signal that your life is being repositioned for something greater than what you were settling for before, and the people who are meant to walk with you into your next season are already being aligned behind the scenes, while the ones who cannot continue the journey are being gently removed without you having to fight or force anything. And if you stay patient during this process, you will soon recognize that the space being created around you right now is not emptiness but preparation for connections that bring peace instead of pressure, clarity instead of confusion, strength instead of doubt, and purpose instead of distraction. And when that realization fully reaches your heart, you will understand why God had to separate you before He could elevate you, because some doors only open after certain people step out of the way, and some blessings only arrive after certain voices stop speaking into your life. And what you are walking through right now is the exact moment where your story begins changing in ways you cannot yet see but will soon be impossible to ignore. There is a moment in every spiritual transition where things stop feeling familiar, not because your life is falling apart, but because God is quietly shifting your position into alignment with something that requires a stronger version of you. And what makes this stage so confusing is that nothing around you clearly explains what is happening, yet deep inside your spirit you can feel that something is changing. And the reason this feeling has become stronger recently is because God is preparing you to walk into opportunities that cannot exist in the same environment where your old habits, your old doubts, and your old emotional attachments once controlled your decisions. And many people miss this moment because they think when life becomes uncertain it means they are losing direction. But what is actually happening is that God is removing the false sense of control you once depended on so that your faith can become the foundation of your next chapter. And there are things being rearranged around you right now that you cannot yet see, but they are already shaping your future in ways that will soon become impossible to ignore. And the reason certain situations have started slowing down while others suddenly stopped completely is because not everything you were connected to was meant to travel with you into the season that is forming ahead of you. And sometimes the greatest protection God gives you is the delay that prevents you from stepping into something that looked right emotionally but was not right spiritually. And this is why you must not allow frustration to convince you that nothing is happening, because even in the silence there are movements taking place behind the scenes that are preparing doors you never expected to open, and conversations you never expected to have, and opportunities you never imagined becoming available. And what makes this process powerful is that God does not only change your circumstances, He changes your vision so that when the right moment arrives, you are able to recognize the blessing instead of doubting it. And there are times when your spirit begins feeling restless, not because something is wrong, but because something is being repositioned, and this restlessness is often the signal that you are standing at the edge of a breakthrough that requires courage to step forward even when the path is not fully visible yet. And what you are experiencing right now is not confusion, but transition, and transition always feels uncomfortable because it requires leaving what you understood behind while trusting something you cannot fully see yet. And the reason this stage is happening now is because God knows you are ready for a level of responsibility, clarity, and purpose that would have overwhelmed you earlier, but now your experiences, your patience, and even the challenges you survived have built a strength inside you that is capable of carrying what is coming next. And there are people who will soon notice a change in The way you speak, the way you think, and the way you respond to situations, because growth always creates distance between who you used to be and who you are becoming, and that distance is not something to fear because it is proof that your life is moving forward even when the progress is invisible to others. And sometimes the hardest part of this journey is trusting that what feels slow right now is actually happening at the exact right speed for your future to unfold correctly, because if everything moved faster than your preparation, your confidence would not be strong enough to hold the blessing when it arrives. And this is why patience has become such an important lesson during this season, because patience is not weakness, it is alignment with timing that has already been chosen for you long before you understood what was being planned. And there is something powerful about the moment when you stop asking why things are changing and start trusting where those changes are leading you, because that is when peace begins replacing uncertainty, and clarity begins replacing fear, and strength begins replacing hesitation. And what you are stepping into next is not something random or temporary, but something designed specifically for the person you are becoming right now. And this is why certain distractions are losing their influence over your attention, and certain conversations no longer feel important the way they once did, because your focus is being redirected towards something that requires more of your energy, more of your confidence, and more of your faith than anything you have experienced before. And the truth is, God never allows you to outgrow your old environment without preparing a new place where your purpose can continue expanding. And what feels unfamiliar today will soon become the foundation of your next level of stability, your next level of peace, and your next level of opportunity. And the reason you are being guided through this stage step by step instead of all at once is because every lesson you are learning right now is strengthening your ability to recognize what truly belongs in your life, and what only looked important for a temporary season. And when the moment arrives where everything begins connecting in ways that finally make sense, you will understand why God allowed certain things to change before He revealed what was waiting ahead of you, because what is being prepared for you now is not something ordinary, but something that required time, patience, and trust to reach the exact moment where you are finally ready to receive it. Sparkles. Before this season is over, you are going to understand why God allowed certain doors to close so suddenly, and why certain people who once felt permanent in your life slowly became distant, quiet, or completely removed. Because what feels like loss right now is actually protection working in real time around you. And even though it may not make sense yet, there is something powerful happening behind the scenes that your eyes cannot fully see, but your spirit has already started to recognize. And the reason this moment feels different from anything you have experienced before is because this is not just another emotional shift or temporary change in your routine, but a divine separation that is preparing you for a level of clarity, strength, and purpose that you were not ready to carry before. And that is exactly why the confusion increased right before the distance appeared, and why conversations suddenly stopped flowing the way they used to, and why certain connections began to feel heavier instead of peaceful. Because when God begins repositioning your life, He does not always announce it with comfort at first. Sometimes He begins by quietly removing distractions that were slowing your growth, even if those distractions once felt familiar, safe, or necessary. And what you are experiencing right now is the moment where heaven starts aligning your path with your assignment instead of your comfort zone. And that alignment always requires courage, even when you did not expect to need it. There are people who walked beside you during a previous version of your life, but they were never meant to walk with you into the next chapter that is opening in front of you now. And the reason this realization feels emotional is because your heart remembers loyalty, while your spirit recognizes destiny. And sometimes those two things do not move in the same direction at the same time. Which is why you may have felt torn between holding on and letting go, between explaining yourself and staying silent, between fighting to keep certain connections alive and feeling a deep inner voice telling you it was time to release them. And that inner voice was not confusion, it was guidance, it was protection. It was God reminding you that not everyone who started the journey with you was assigned to finish it with you. And once you begin to accept that truth, something inside you starts becoming lighter, even if the situation itself has not changed yet. Right now, there is a shift happening inside your thinking that is more important than the shift happening around your circumstances, because God is strengthening the way you see yourself before He reveals the next level of your purpose to the world. And that is why you may have noticed that you are no longer reacting the same way to negativity the way you used to. You are no longer chasing approval the way you once did. And you are no longer explaining your value to people who refuse to recognize it. Because something inside you is waking up, and that awakening is changing your standards, your patience, your expectations, and even your silence. And the reason this change feels unfamiliar is because growth always feels uncomfortable before it becomes natural. But what you are stepping into right now is not temporary motivation, it is permanent transformation fire. There were moments recently when you wondered if the distance you felt from certain people meant something was wrong with you. But what if that distance was actually evidence that something is finally going right for you? What if the silence you experienced was not rejection but redirection? What if the separation that confused you was actually protection moving ahead of you to prepare space for something better than what you were trying to hold on to? Because sometimes God removes noise so you can finally hear your purpose clearly, and sometimes He removes people so you can finally see your value without their opinions shaping your identity. And once that realization settles inside your spirit, you stop fighting the process and start trusting the direction even when you cannot see the destination yet. This season is teaching you something powerful about timing that most people never fully understand, because not every delay is denial and not every ending is loss. Sometimes what looks like a pause is actually preparation happening quietly beneath the surface. And while you were wondering why certain opportunities slowed down, and why certain answers did not arrive when you expected them to, God was building strength inside you that your future requires and your past could not hold. And the reason this preparation feels intense is because what is coming next is not ordinary progress, it is accelerated movement once the alignment is complete. And that is why the enemy tried so hard to distract you with doubt and frustration recently, because distraction is the easiest way to delay someone who is close to stepping into purpose. But you did not stop moving forward even when things became unclear. And that persistence is exactly why this next shift cannot be taken away from you now. There is also something important happening in the way people are beginning to respond to your presence, even if they have not said it out loud yet, because when God starts elevating someone internally, it eventually becomes visible externally. And the same people who once overlooked your effort begin noticing your consistency. The same people who once doubted your direction begin watching your progress quietly. And the same environments that once felt comfortable begin feeling too small for who you are becoming, not because you are changing for attention, but because your purpose is expanding beyond the limits that used to define you. And when purpose expands, it naturally creates distance from anything that cannot grow with a glowing star. You may not realize it yet, but this season is also restoring something inside your confidence that previous disappointments tried to weaken, because every experience that hurt you also taught you something valuable about discernment, patience, and strength. And those lessons are now becoming tools that help you recognize what belongs in your future and what was only meant to pass through your past. And once you begin trusting those lessons instead of questioning them, your decisions become clearer, your steps become stronger, and your direction becomes more focused than ever before. Because clarity is one of the greatest signs that God is guiding your path even when circumstances are still unfolding slowly. There is a reason you feel a quiet determination growing inside you lately, even during moments when nothing around you appears to be changing quickly, because real transformation always begins internally before it becomes visible externally. And what you are feeling right now is the early evidence that something new is already forming in your life, even if it has not fully arrived yet. And that inner confidence is not imagination, it is confirmation that your season is shifting and your story is moving forward in a way that cannot be reversed by the same obstacles that once slowed you down. Because once God begins moving someone into alignment with their assignment, the process may challenge them, but it never abandons them. And that means the direction you are walking in right now is not random, it is intentional, protected, and guided, even when it feels quiet along the way sparkles. So if you have been wondering whether the recent changes around you meant something was falling apart, or something was finally falling into place, this is the moment to recognize that what is happening is not loss but positioning, not confusion but preparation, not distance but protection. Because the same God who allowed certain people to step back from your life is the same God who is preparing the right opportunities, the right connections, and the right timing to step forward into your future. And very soon you are going to look back at this exact season and realize that what once felt uncertain was actually the beginning of the breakthrough you had been waiting for all along. There is something happening in your life right now that most people around you cannot fully understand, because the changes you are experiencing are not just happening on the surface where everyone can see them, but deep inside your spirit, where God begins preparing someone before He reveals what He is about to do next. And the reason you have been feeling this unusual mixture of pressure and expectation at the same time is because you are standing in a transition season where your old identity is slowly releasing its hold on you, while your new purpose is quietly stepping closer than ever before. And even though this moment may feel confusing at times, it is actually one of the most important turning points in your entire journey, because what is happening now is not random delay or emotional exhaustion, but spiritual preparation for something that is about to change the direction of your life in ways you could not have imagined before. There were moments recently when you started noticing that the same environments that once felt comfortable no longer bring you peace the way they used to, and the same conversations that once felt normal now feel heavy or unnecessary, and the same routines that once gave you stability now feel like they are holding you back instead of moving you forward. And this shift is not happening by accident, because when God begins moving someone toward a higher level of purpose, He first changes what they can tolerate, so they will not remain in places that are too small for the future He is preparing for them. And even though this change can feel uncomfortable at first, it is actually one of the clearest signs that you are being repositioned for something greater than what you have experienced before. You may have also noticed that certain people who once played a strong role in your life have slowly become distant or quiet without explanation, and at times that silence may have made you question whether something was wrong with you or whether you could have done something differently to keep those connections the same as they were before. But what you need to understand right now is that not every separation is a rejection, and not every distance is a mistake, because sometimes God removes people from your life not to punish you but to protect the version of you that is finally ready to grow beyond the limits that those relationships could hold. And once you begin to recognize that truth, your perspective starts changing from confusion to clarity, and from disappointment to confidence. There is also something powerful happening in the way your thoughts are changing lately, because you are no longer willing to accept situations that drain your energy the way you once did, and you are no longer chasing approval from people who never truly understood your value in the first place. And you are no longer afraid of walking alone if walking alone is what it takes to remain aligned with the direction God is guiding you toward. And that kind of strength does not appear suddenly without reason, because it is evidence that your spirit is becoming stronger than your fears and your faith is becoming louder than your doubts, even if you have not said that out loud to anyone yet. Right now there is a quiet protection surrounding your life that you may not fully recognize yet, because protection does not always look like obvious miracles or sudden victories. Sometimes it looks like unanswered messages, sometimes it looks like closed doors, sometimes it looks like unexpected delays that kept you from stepping into situations that would have distracted you from your assignment. And later you are going to realize that the same moments that once felt frustrating were actually moments where God was redirecting your steps towards something that was always meant for you, even before you understood why those changes were necessary. There is a reason you have been feeling a stronger desire to move forward even while certain parts of your life still feel uncertain, because purpose always creates momentum before it creates results. And what you are experiencing right now is the beginning of that momentum building quietly inside you, even if the outside world has not caught up with it yet. And the more you continue trusting this process, the more clearly you are going to see that the resistance you faced recently was never meant to stop you but to strengthen you for the responsibility that is coming with the next opportunity God is preparing for your life fire. Something else is also changing around you that many people do not notice until later, because when God begins preparing someone for a new season, He also begins shifting the way others respond to them. And even if people do not say it directly, you may have already started sensing that certain individuals are watching you differently, or speaking to you differently, or even keeping their distance without explaining why. And this happens because when your purpose begins rising, your presence begins changing, and not everyone is comfortable with change, especially when they can feel that you are stepping into something they cannot control or fully understand. At the same time, there is a deeper confidence forming inside you that did not exist the same way before, and that confidence is not coming from circumstances or approval or recognition from others, but from the quiet assurance that God is guiding your steps even when the path ahead is not fully visible yet. And this kind of confidence becomes one of the strongest foundations a person can stand on, because once you begin trusting that your direction is protected, you stop worrying about who supports you and who does not, and you start focusing on where you are being led instead of where you used to be. You may not realize how close you are right now to a moment that will make many of the recent struggles finally make sense, because there are situations that felt confusing while you were living through them, but very soon you are going to look back and understand that each delay, each separation, each unexpected change was part of a larger alignment that was moving your life towards something stronger than what you were trying to hold on to before. And when that realization becomes clear, you are going to recognize that what once looked like uncertainty was actually preparation working quietly in your favor the entire time. Sparkles. So if there has been a moment recently when you questioned whether the changes happening around you were signs that something was going wrong in your life, this is the reminder you needed to hear today, because what is happening right now is not confusion, it is positioning, not rejection, it is protection, not delay, it is preparation, because the same God who allowed certain doors to close behind you is already opening the path that will lead you into the next chapter that has been waiting for you longer than you realize, and very soon you are going to see that this season was never meant to break your confidence, but to build the strength you needed to step into the future that is finally ready for you.